Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for attending the RAS 13 Raas Reboot ex session. Before we meet our panelists to dive into content, we will be dropping a form. So please fill it out. It's going to be for attendance. And if you haven't already, you can fill it out now. Here, I'll send it right now. Yeah, and then we'll also be dropping a Slido link into the chat for you to send any questions if you have any anonymously. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can at the end of the session, as much time that we have left. Surge just dropped the link. So for this session and all the other weekend, we'll ask you guys to maintain proper session etiquette, which includes remaining muted unless prompted by our panelists or board and being respectful to the Zoom chat. We would also love to see your guys' faces, so please turn on your cameras. And now I'd like to hang it off to our incredible panelists for this session, Bhavik, Amolika, Neil, and Atish. Introduce yourselves, and the floor is off to you guys.
Cool. Can everyone see my screen? I can't actually see anyone's face, so someone's gonna have to say yes just to make sure.
Yes, you can see it.
All right, cool. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to the execution panel. We'll just do some brief intros. Hi, everyone. My name is Bhavik. I was on GT Ramblin' Ross from 2016 to 2020, and I captained from 2017 to 2020.
Hey, everyone. I'm Neil. I was on Ross from 2017 to 2020, and I was captain the last 2 years.
Hi guys, I'm Amalika. I was on Team Rasta all 4 years of my undergrad. I was vice captain my second year and captain the next two, so the 2020 season and this past year.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm a bit on the older side. I was on Roaring Ross from 2015 to 2017. I was captain the last year. That was mechanics year. After that, I was captain of alumni team, and then I've been judging since then. So yeah.
Cool. So to kind of start off our segment, we're just going to play a couple videos of what we think is good execution for these different categories. And we'd like y'all in the chat to kind of just, as we play the clips, just type out, this is why it's good for this specific thing. And each one of us will be going over why we think this particular segment was good. So as long as everything's good to go, I'll start off with this choreo segment from UMD 2018. I think y'all should be able to hear this, but someone just scream at me if it doesn't work.
Cue music.
Okay, cool. I don't know if y'all had time to put stuff in the chat yet. I can't actually see the chat. Oh, yes, I can. So here, I got the chat up here. Go ahead, Atish.
Okay, so talking on that little clip that we just watched. So you can rewatch probably the entire performance because it's pretty good. But that particular portion, you can see that they kind of have the lights dimmed down and they have a silhouette effect. And because of that, you can't really see any faces. And what's kind of different from that clip compared to other clips is that you can't really tell one dancer from the other. They're all pretty much the same, dancer when it comes to execution. And they check off almost every single thing on the rubric when it comes to, arms, angle, sharpness. Their energy is insane. They're doing their head choreo. And if you watch the rest of the clip, you'll see they're hitting their forms, they're getting their transitions down. So yeah, that particular last song that they do is really good for a last song in any routine.
Cool. Yeah. Now I'll go ahead and play something from DSD 2018. So. Yeah, so give y'all some time to put stuff in the chat.
Yeah. Go ahead, type anything. You can type anything good execution-wise. Specifically, we'll dive a little bit more into the formational aspect. So we're getting some smooth transitions, hit every spot, maintain shapes, diagonals, smooth movements. We're getting a spot on the same beat, symmetry, transitions again. Ooh, yeah. If there are any more thoughts, go ahead and pop them in. But yeah, a lot of the things that you guys are saying in the chat, that like 100% they're hitting those things good execution wise. So you can obviously see like they have great formations and movement in their TT as a baseline. And you can see kind of also the idea that they had behind their Trentali segment. So they wanted to showcase dynamic formations, large stage utilization and movements. And to that extent itself, the idea itself was executed quite well. Additionally, when we're talking like specifically about the formations, some of the things you guys were saying, formations being hit together, that means everyone's getting to their spots on the same beat. So it's not like some people are hitting half a beat earlier than others, or it's kind of like a snake as people are coming in when it's not supposed to be. Everyone's hitting together. And then once they're getting there, everyone's staying in spot. So you get that like accuracy and consistency as well. So you don't have people like shaking in and out of lines like that. And then also touching upon that, what was it? The smooth movements, the transitions, like you guys were talking about, as they're going from one formation to the other. On one level, like the ideation of the formation, it was well executed in that they were created to flow. And then also as the dancers are moving through them, they're really capturing that. And it's kind of a smooth movement, not something that's, you know, broken up. So good execution there.
Cool. Now I'll move on to something from CMU 2020, so 2 years ago. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, go ahead and put some stuff in the chat for that. Yeah, so I'm seeing some like amazing formation. Each layer is clear and defined. That's really good. The choreo doesn't lose sharpness. Yep, everyone in time with each other on the rise and drops. Yeah, so a lot of like great stuff being said. So specifically for like cascades or layering or whatever you may want to call it, this one is really good. I remember for a couple different reasons. One, personally in execution, I like to see like symmetry, and sometimes for like cascade and layering, that doesn't always end up happening. So for something like this, the way they executed it was really nice, just because like, first of all, when I saw it in person, there was so much going on, but it was so like synchronized at the same time. So I think it was really nice to be able to see all the different layers being hit. And it was only like a 6-second kind of like cascade or layering part, but it was something where I remember seeing it in person. I was like, oh, like I need to like go back and watch that, because there was just so much going on, but it looked so aesthetically pleasing. A lot of times when people do like cascades or layering or something, you'll know if it's poorly executed, you can't really tell what is supposed to be happening at all the different like times. So I think this one was really good, because not only were they moving in different directions, there was different I guess like heights of what moves were being hit. It was just a very like aesthetic and well synchronized portion. So I think all of those things kind of added together to make it like a very powerful cascade and moment in their dance. So okay, now I'll go to VCU's piece from 2016.
So yeah, so personally, this has like always been one of my favorite themes of all time, and specifically here, I feel like PCU does a great job of being aware of that they're using a very small prop, and they're aware of that, so they all line up on front stage, and they make it very easy for the audience, the judges, or anyone to see. and how the girls and the guys are standing, nobody's blocking each other, so it makes it very clear. And then on top of that, you know, how the guys are able to pull it out, nobody's fumbling around for it. It's very clean, and overall it's very clean and direct. And even though it's a very small thing, like they make it as big as possible for the audience.
All right, so we just talked about some aspects of, well, the aspects of execution, and I guess what we'll do now is talk in more detail about each portion of execution. I guess you can say that. So like I said, I've judged quite a bit. I judged RES the last year that there was an RES. Unfortunately, we haven't had competitions in some time now. But yeah, so everything I'm about to say is pretty much from the rubric, but I'll give some more, I guess, details about it, and then later on throughout the rest of the presentation, we'll talk about how you can do a better job of like doing that stuff rather than just telling you what it is, right? So something that I always talk about is how the reason why I like execution is because it's subjective. Like you did it or you didn't. You know, with choreo, with choreo and artistic, you different interpretations can be taken in a different way. People will value certain things more than others, so on and so forth, right? But with execution, you either did it or you didn't. Yeah, you did it or you didn't. And so another thing that I always tell everybody is that, well, and if you're a dancer, you definitely know this. Like if you have any training in a previous style before you join the Raas team, execution is never going to be perfect. Like you can get to this point where it's like you're almost perfect, but there will be always one little flaw in your own performance. And then when you have more people on stage, that's even more room for, I guess, error, right? You know, to be human is to err. And so that's something that if you learn and accept at a earlier point in your dancing career, I guess, like it's just something that you can strive for to become as perfect as possible. And like I'm gonna be honest, there's some dancers in the circuit that really got close to being perfect. You know, I think there's like maybe 4 or 5 that come to my mind that are like pretty much there. But even those dancers had flaws. Yes, Nietzsche is one of those people for sure. Okay, so I guess starting to talk about the rubric, and I believe the rubric is available on the RES page. So if anybody wants to just look at I mean, I think if you're a captain or you're leading a team, you definitely need to look at the rubrics for all categories. So for me at least, and for the most part, every other judge that I've talked with, the most straightforward is recovery. You usually get full points on that, unless like you made a mistake and you just straight up just froze, or you get flustered, you make a phase, you know, then yeah, you may lose a point. If it continues multiple times, you lose more than 1 point. Another thing to point out for me, at least this is how I do it, I don't give points, I take away points. So everyone starts with like 10 out of 10 or whatever the allotted points is for each category. And so each time you make a mistake in that particular category, I'll remove like some points, half a point, whatever, up to a certain amount. And I'll explain my system later if anybody's interested. But yeah, so recovery is pretty straightforward. You make a mistake and you show that you made a mistake, you're gonna get points off. If you own your mistake, I'm personally not gonna take points off. You drop your nanias, I'm not gonna take points off. You know, like I said, everyone makes little mistakes. I'm not gonna be nitpicky about all that stuff. And then I think the next part that like most people notice, and that includes anybody in the audience, is synchronization. So in synchronization, it is pretty much dancing as a unit. You know, is everybody together? Is everyone doing the same thing at the same time? And that choreo clip that we saw of UMD is a prime example of synchronization. You could not tell one dancer apart from the other, and that's how it should be. Of course, like every dancer has like their own little twist to how they dance, and they add their own little flair to it. But for the most part, you should be able to blend in with the rest of your teammates, right? So things that will, like if somebody messes up, that messes up synchronization because they're standing out, right? If someone's a little late or lags behind, that's synchronization. And we'll talk more. We'll get into how you can fix that and what you can do to help get better at that a little bit later. The next thing that straight up comes to mind after that, and something that everybody knows what Raas is about, is energy. You know, like as a judge, we're usually in like the balcony and we can see pretty much every single person on that stage, including the people that some teams, they throw their weaker dancers in the back. And yes, we can tell when you do that because it's very obvious. You have your dancers in the front just going crazy, and then you have the dancers in the back thinking that they're covered and they're dropping their knees trying to conserve their energy. And we notice that, and that's definitely a no-go. So energy is definitely something that will come with more stamina training, endurance, so on and so forth. And something that I usually tell everybody when it comes to energy, if you have your knees up and you're sharp with everything you do, that is the best way to keep your energy up. And yeah, you will get more tired faster the more you do that, but that's just building up stamina to make sure you can do the full routine like that. So that's definitely the key points of energy. When it comes to grace, I think another important aspect of grace is like Trantali and Garba. And the reason for that is because it's completely different than Raas. You can be more fluid in how you do like your choreo and stuff in Trantali. And then in Garba, you can be kind of fluid and sharp with everything you do. So it can be fluid and also be high energy at the same time at different portions of the Garba clip. And then you have Raas where it's just full on energy the entire time. So I think like as you're making a routine, and this falls into more choreo, but thinking of like choreo that can help benefit your fluidity in your execution on like Garba and Trantali, that's definitely beneficial for your execution side. And like, yeah, you can do some fluid choreo for your Raas segments and stuff. Like when you do your glides or sways, whatever you may call them, like that's a bit more fluid than doing 3 steps, double touches, so on and so forth. But yeah, that's grace, making sure you're hitting like your angles. And we'll get into more about how you can hit those angles and how to get everybody on like the same level, even those that are like new onto the team. The next part would be forms. And from my experience, I'm not gonna, I won't say that like everyone just tries to do individual choreo execution. Yes, a lot of teams also do focus on forms, but there are also many like more mistakes in forms than I see in the other categories for the most part. And that's because like, so when we think of forms, it's like hitting your lines, your diagonals, your straight lines, whatever they may be, your circles, and like the different shapes, right? So when you're hitting these forms, yeah, we don't know what those forms are supposed to be. So you have to hit them in a way that, oh, it's like, well, we see the shapes that you're trying to do. We see what it is. Is it like a spread out form? Is it meant to be a cluster? If it is a cluster, you don't want to just throw everyone together. You still want to set where the people are in that cluster. You know, it can be like a diamond, it can be like a small little hexagon, whatever it may be. But the point is you want to make sure that every form you're hitting, it's very distinct when you do it. So even when you have like a form like sequence, like you're just doing form to form to form to form, you want to hit each and every single one of those forms before you move on to the next one. So if you're going from form 1, 2, 3, it's because that's 1, 2, 3 in the span of like 8 counts, whatever it may be. You want to make sure that as soon as you hit your second form, like I won't say make sure you stop, but if you were to pause the video right there, can you see that there is a proper form met right there before you move on to the next thing? So that's something to keep in mind. And then I think when it comes to forms, the most common mistake that I see is transitions and dancing in spot. So with dancing in spot, the way I kind of like word it to everyone is like, are you shuffling in spot? You know, like if one person is shuffling, it's okay, of course. Like I don't want to see it, but if I see 3 or 4 different people shuffling throughout the entire little form or whatever, that's definitely that's a no-go, because then it doesn't look unified, you know, it stands out. And when it comes to transitions, like you want to make sure when you're hitting your forms, you are going to each form at the same time. Or like if you're trying to like if you're doing like a hit the form, hit the form, hit the form, that's okay too, but make sure it's still symmetrical on both sides, because usually it is symmetrical. And if it's not, then you can usually tell when it's supposed to be, oh, right here, right here, right here. But if you have someone straggling along or getting to their spot late or getting to their spot and the other team members are already starting to move, like that's where you start losing points on like forms. So yeah, forms are very important when it comes to execution, at least. It's something that we notice more than others because it's a lot more obvious since everyone's like already moving. And then the last few things to talk about when it comes to judging execution is your head core and your facials. That definitely has to be there. I'll talk a little bit more about why, particularly for head choreo and facials. But yeah, so like your head choreo needs to be all out, and like we'll give some more tips throughout the presentation on how to do that. There's a few teams that do it very well, and that's definitely something to like to try to understand how they do it, why they do it, and like you'll generally see that the higher executing performing teams are going to be the ones that are doing their head choreo all out. So that there's definitely a lot of value to head choreo because it makes it a lot more complex for the rest of your execution. With facials, I'm just to be frank, the guys generally have a lower level of facials, but that's not something that cannot be fixed. You know, like something that I struggled with as a dancer was facials, but it looks stupid when you do it. You should definitely look in a mirror and practice your facial. So, so something I always tell dancers whenever I'm judging them, or I tell the captains at least, is I can tell when someone is not doing their facials, and for the most part, it's usually the guys, and it looks like you're being forced into doing this. You know, if you're dancing, you want to do it out of your own free will, and you're doing it because you're enjoying yourself. Like something that I always told my team whenever I was dancing is like I did a lot whenever I was captain because I had like work and school and all this other a bunch of stuff. But the few times I were like 8 times I was on stage, those were like the most stress-free moments of my like entire year, just like pure bliss. And like once you get to that point where you actually can feel that way about Raas, your facials will come naturally. So it's not something, I mean, you can force it on your teammates, but it's something to not really force, at least let them develop it naturally. So that's pretty much, you know, facials at least. A couple of other things when it comes to grace is like bends. Like so when you're doing your bends on Tali Garba, or even if you just bend down during like a cascade or whatever, you want to make sure that those bends are pretty leveled. Of course, you have like the height differences, and no one can take away points for if it looks off because someone's like a giant and someone else is short, right? But you want to still like have the same level of bend. You don't want someone like if someone's flat back and someone else is like straight down here, like you don't want that. You want some uniformity in bends. And when it comes to like dancing in the dark, you definitely don't want to like slack off because we can still see how like your energy and like if you're just going off like in the dark. A lot of times that I've seen, sometimes dancers in the back, especially in the dark, they will start to slack off, and that's definitely where you start losing some points because we can see every single thing that you're doing, you know. Yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to the rubric. It's pretty straightforward if you read it, but like reading it is one thing and understanding and how to get to that level that it is top tier execution is another thing. And I think that's things that I touched on. We will definitely get into that more as we're going on throughout the presentation. So for me personally, I do like this whole tally system with each category. And if I see a mistake, I'll like make a tally of it. And like, so it's really hectic and stuff, but for the most part, every single execution judge will be able to see if you're hitting your forms, if you're hitting your transitions, who is not doing that stuff. If you're like late to your forms, if your knees are high, whose knees are down, if they're dancing weak, if they're not being sharp, if their arms are off, so on and so forth. Like, I don't think any execution judge just watches one dancer at a time. We look at the whole collective thing, and that's something to keep in mind. So if you're gonna be the captain or whoever is in charge of the team that puts your better dancers in front, trust me, from my experience, almost every single judge will look to the back first before they look at the front. So if you're doing that, you're doing yourself a disservice. Me personally, I knew that. I would definitely, well, what I did was I had my entire team shuffling around the entire time. And like, I understand why people put like the stronger dancers in front, but it's something to keep in mind. I think the circuit needs to start moving away from that. And I think they have already started doing that, which is a good thing. And everyone should get their moment to shine in the front. So that's pretty much it for when it comes to judging execution. Yeah. And I think Neil had a few other words about executing.
You basically covered what I said, so I think I can talk more about it in the next topic.
Okay. Some of the judging no-nos that we had. I guess this is more of like little pet peeves, I guess. For me, whenever I'm watching a performance, yeah, I can tell when people would switch out their dancers, and I don't like that just because I understand why teams do it. They want to get everyone an opportunity to dance. You know, I 100% get it. But when it comes to judging a performance, I look at the whole thing. You know, like if you're gonna switch someone out because they're getting weak for someone who's like fresh and about to go ham, yeah, I'm gonna value that a lot less if compared to a team that had a dancer who may have been weak the entire time but was in the same performance the entire time. That's just my pet peeve.
Yeah, and obviously I haven't judged before, but this is just something like when I see it. So when you're like transitioning on and off stage, a lot of times you can't really, like, you yourself may think you're not visible anymore. But like this used to happen to us a lot. Like make sure you're completing your movement all the way through the stage, like off stage, or even on stage. Like don't like walk or like kind of like, for lack of a better term, like half-ass the rest of the part like when you're leaving stage, because as soon as I see that, and we used to do this, like it's just something where I'm like, that's not great because you're still visible to everyone.
I can jump in next. So one thing that's, I think, less of like a pet peeve, but maybe more of something that kind of elevates execution, for me at least, is facials, obviously. But within facials, having variety. So whether that's like emoting at certain like high energy parts of the song, like really bright eyes, really like different like, I don't know, mouth shapes or whatever that is, whatever that means. And then also mouthing lyrics is something that I have found helps a lot. Whether or not you know the lyrics, sometimes you can just say like, so I know some people count like 1 and 2 and still like their mouth is moving. They have that variety in their face and it's bringing a different level of like energy to the piece. And then also smiling throughout your whole face, smiling from the eyes. Those are things that really elevate the piece, especially when someone is watching it in person. So from the audience and judges' perspectives, it's a little bit harder to capture in videos. Although now I think we have some like 4K videos out there maybe. So you can see people's expressions a little bit better, but just in general, when it comes to adding, you know, kind of elevating execution, having that variety and brightness in facials really helps.
Neil, did you want to share yours? I think you had one as well for this.
Yeah, it was basically the same thing that Atish covered. You know, I think when people go from front stage to backstage, it's very out, like, you know, you're following people moving around stage, and it's very obvious when people, you can tell people are like changing their energy levels when they move front to back, whether it's individual dancers or the whole team. Like Atish said, we can see everything. Judges can see everything, and even the audience can see everything. So the next thing we want to talk about is how teams can improve their execution, mainly the different topics Atish covered in the rubric. So the first thing we want to talk about is facials and heads. So when it comes to teaching heads, I think there's like 2 different ways you can go about it. You can teach it right when you teach all the arm choreo and leg choreo, or you can also teach it later on. And I know, like, personally, my team has tried both things, and when we've tried teaching it later on, it's become very difficult. You know, because people already built that muscle memory. They've practiced how they move. They practice, you know, how they're doing every move, and they've had those reps and reps. And when you add in the heads later, or like don't focus on the heads till later, you're basically like changing the move. You know, a move with or without heads is 2 very different moves, especially if you're doing like big all out heads. So I think it's important to teach those heads at the very beginning, have them ingrained as like a part of the move that's not just like an add-on, but that's absolutely necessary. And that way you can get the full effect of them and build that muscle memory throughout your season.
To add on with like facials and head choreo, I talked about how important it is, but something that I always tell everybody to get better at it, or how to get better at it, is so whenever you're dancing or you're looking forward, you don't want to just look forward, because looking forward still kind of looks down from a judge's perspective when you're all the way up here looking down on somebody, right? So what we always did was to set looking forward a little bit higher. So at this angle right here is usually where you're forward rather than right here, right? So from right here, your up is all the way up, and this would also help like your dancers get a better idea of how to like make your head choreo more emphasized. And the last thing about like emphasizing your head choreo is to let your chin dictate where your head choreo is. And the reason why I say that is because when you're here and you look up, oftentimes people will like look up and they think they are going up or up enough, and that's usually not the case. But if your chin is all the way up as high as possible, then you're good. If your chin is touching your chest, you're down. If your chin is touching your shoulders, you're looking to the sides. So that's usually the biggest tip that I give when I'm judging somebody and I see like they may be struggling with head choreo emphasis. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. And then kind of moving on to the next thing. So obviously the goal is to have perfect execution for your entire set, but like Atish, I think said this earlier, like that's somewhat unrealistic. Like you can strive for that. So if you really have to like tier it out and think about like what should I prioritize, like your big moments in your set, those should be executed like very cleanly, like very like, because you want the impact of that moment to be like received well by like the judges, the audience, whatever. So if you're like trying to think of what things to clean and like what things to focus on, maybe every song has like one or two like large moments. You want to make sure that those are really hitting well, because that's what people will remember. When you think back about old sets, you usually remember like, I mean, you probably remember a lot of stuff, but like some things that stick out are like whatever their big moments were. And if you can execute those really well, then it's going to do like really like it'll make your performance just that much better. And then kind of going into like videos. So I'll talk a little bit more about like videos over breaks and stuff. And I think Amolika's got some stuff about like watching sessions and stuff like that. For our team personally, something that worked out kind of well. So obviously like the big breaks that you have in your semester, like during the school year, you have like a summer break, obviously, and then like a winter break, a Thanksgiving break, and like spring break or whatever. I think that's a great time to implement like making sure you record videos and like do stuff. And what we used to do as captains, especially over the summer, I know like a lot of people don't practice over the summer, but for us, like it just, to improve your dancers, you kind of just need a lot of reps and stuff. So over the summer, people would record whatever choreo we had taught, and then us as captains would split up the dancers and kind of just like give like really detailed comments, like with timestamps and stuff like that, being like, hey, fix this, and over time, hopefully that helps them like figure out what stuff they need to improve on. And not only is it important for fixing mistakes in terms of like cleanliness, but also like a big part of execution is stamina, and those like long breaks. If you're not really doing anything, you're going to come back and you're just going to look gassed. Especially like winter break is a big one, right? Because you're transitioning back into like the main part of comp season, which is spring. So you want to make sure that you're kind of staying fit.
So yeah, I can talk a little bit more about videos outside of breaks, more in practices. So we really try to record as much as we can, especially when we're doing like full runs at practice, whether it's like if we have the entire piece put together or even just song by song when we're practicing that. Having these videos and then sharing them with the team really helps everyone to see what exactly they look like when they're dancing, and it helps a lot to visualize that instead of just saying like, oh, like you need to improve your execution, like telling them you need to do XYZ. Having that visual there, especially for new dancers, helps so much, because they're able to see exactly what it is that you're talking about and how exactly they can maybe move differently or hit an angle differently. get to a spot differently that will actually align with what you're saying when it comes to execution. So some of the things that we also do after performances that we have, especially competitions, we'll have like viewing parties. So we'll watch back the video that we get of the competition and kind of go through and discuss the things that we see from now, like that videos like that's often taken from near the judge's perspective, what that looks like on stage. And just having, again, that visual aspect as much as you can. So even like during practices, during like individual pod sessions, we'll talk about later, but that helps a lot with dancers being able to see what execution from kind of a macro viewpoint looks like. So next, I'll talk a little bit about running practices. So there are obviously a lot of different ways that you can run your practice and should run your practice, just to have that variety and everything in there. Some things that help specifically with execution is I found like obviously focusing on different aspects of execution. Like Bhavik talked about, sometimes there are big moments that you really want to focus on. So maybe you want to have a practice or a segment of practice devoted to that, and structured in that way. Other times, things that I've done in the past is we'll devote a practice to, say, working mainly on formations. So that'll be one where we're really focusing on what forms we're hitting, how we're getting there, when we're getting there, staying in spot, that kind of stuff. So solely like mainly focusing on that movement aspect, formation aspect. Other segments of practice will be devoted just to cleaning choreography. So especially for us, where we have these kind of like intricate, more unique choreo segments, that's especially where we'll drill a little bit more. And that helps elevate our level of like synchronization and also just everyone's level of comfort with the choreo that they're doing. One big thing that we also like to emphasize is to practice like you perform, especially when we're doing those end of practice like runs where we're putting together everything that we worked on. So that's where we take those videos and we really say practice how you perform, so you can not only from the video see what you look like when you're, you know, performing at close to an onstage level, but you can also physically feel. So each dancer can feel what it's like to dance all out, you know, full energy, going through a whole 6-minute piece, what their stamina is like, how that changes. So that really, that mentality, practice like you perform, is really big, because obviously, and as we know, especially if you've danced on stage before, as soon as you get on stage, it all becomes like, it's muscle memory, right? You're not actively thinking like you are in practices and drills. So by practicing like you perform, that just really helps set that muscle memory. It helps make it like second nature when you're on stage. And then I'll transition to stamina techniques. My little chunk right here. So going off of that, definitely there are a lot of ways to build stamina. And that is definitely something that should be focused on in kind of like a more long-term view as well. So within practices and also across practices, across the seats and things like that. So some techniques that we've found, especially when it comes to doing larger chunks of the piece. So once you have like 3/4 of the entire piece built out, certain things like obviously doing full runs when you can, and pacing those so that, you know, you're actually utilizing those properly and not just doing a full run to do a full run kind of thing. So pacing those, making sure that obviously you're keeping in mind like feasibility and the level of stamina that your team is at, but also like what you know your team can do. Because sometimes people will say like, oh, I'm so tired. And like, you're like, I know the way that you dance, you know, I'm familiar with your level of execution. I know that you can push yourself just a little bit more. So staying realistic, but also optimistic about your dancers. So things like half runs are things that we've utilized in the past, doing like half a piece, and then taking a break in practice, a short break, and then doing the second half, or sometimes doing the second half first, and then resetting, doing the first half. So that helps, again, with people dancing the second half with now like full energy. That's the first thing that they're doing the run, and they get a feel like physically for what that feels like and how they can translate that into doing a full run all in one go. We've also done like in-spot runs to help with synchronization. And again, focusing on that choreography. And then every others is another thing that we do. So we'll say like for this run, do the first song all out, full arms, heads, legs, formations. Then the second song, maybe do in spot or just do the arms and heads as you're moving in formation. So that might be to really focus. If we're doing like a half type of run, like you're only doing arms and heads, maybe that's because you really focus on formations that day. So you really want people thinking about that rather than just building like their physical stamina. You're building like their kind of mental stamina to take in the whole piece, soak it in, and make that muscle memory. Cool.
Yeah, and then just one quick
and then,
oh, sorry. I just want to add one quick thing. So are you done with the stamina techniques? Are you going to individual pods?
yeah, I was gonna say on topic.
Oh, yeah. So just, yeah, one quick thing I wanted to say, and this is kind of similar to what she was talking about. Like, I think a full and a half is like a really good way. We've tried doing 2 back-to-back runs. That one's more like keep going until you like kind of tap out. A lot of it, like Malika was saying, it's kind of a mental barrier. Like you can do a lot more than you think you can. So we would just like run a full in formation and then literally like restart the music, run it back and do at least half. And over time, if you keep doing that, like if you could do a full and a half and like not be, I mean, you'll be tired at the end, obviously, but if you can do that, then like one, just start to finish is going to be cake. And like, I guess this kind of touches a little bit on like team leadership stuff, but like if you're a captain or like a senior member, if you set that example and you're like trying to like improve a lot and like do this kind of stuff, like everyone will just follow like after you. So you should just make sure that you're doing these kind of things. So that's all.
Another note there, and part of it goes back to the break videos, just to offer like another like perspectives. Like CMU, for example, with break videos, we don't compete in the fall typically, so we won't have summer break practices or videos, but we will do it for the subsequent break. So that's just another perspective for like if your timeline is different, how your like even video timeline can look different like that. Another thing kind of going off of that helps with stamina, I know obviously Bhavik, you can talk about it more, but like GT, you guys do like your AVs kind of choreography and set first. And so that's where, I mean, go ahead and talk, you can.
Yeah. So for our audition videos, we do our second half of our dance is our AV. So it's like the first thing we learn. And that way, the reason we do it that way is because by the time you're at the end of the set, you're usually more tired. But if it's the first thing you learned, it'll be more ingrained into your muscle memory. It'll feel very natural. And like, I mean, this is just personally, like, I don't know, y'all can disagree, but like for our Garba segment, like our G2 or Betali or whatever, like that's usually one of our stronger segments just because it's like the first song we learn. And even though it's like in the latter half of the dance, it's just comfortable for everyone. And because you're going to come out at the beginning of the dance and you're going to be hype, obviously, like you haven't started dancing yet. So for us, that's kind of worked to kind of just maintain better energy throughout the set. So just a thought on that.
Yeah. Cool. And then the very last bullet point here, another kind of best practice that some of us have used a lot are individual and pod sessions. So individuals, obviously that's a one-on-one, maybe you'll have a captain or a senior dancer working with a new dancer. And then that again allows for a lot of that nitty-gritty kind of cleaning that you don't quite get in practices because you're focusing on the big picture, you're trying to focus on everyone. And then pod sessions, same thing, running those in smaller groups. And again, going back to videos, I really like to record and then walk through with the dancer, like what's happening, what they're seeing, how that can be improved. So they really get that visual aspect. Cool. And then this last slide that we have here is to talk about moments that our own teams have struggled with execution and what we did to kind of overcome that. So the first thing I'll talk about, I'm going to go a little bit out of order, but the impact of kind of team mentality and motivation. And what kind of that impact means for execution. So oftentimes, like we'll see a little bit of a decrease in motivation as we go throughout, especially our comp season, just because it's a lot more dancing, people are tired. That's another like long run, not just physical stamina, but like mental stamina. People are dealing with like school, classwork, assignments, recruiting, everything, right? So we're seeing a certain level of decrease in motivation. And so that you can see that lead sometimes to a little bit more sloppiness or less like care when it comes to approaching practices. So that's kind of one thing that I've looked at as like, you know, sometimes it's hard to see where exactly the root cause of like a lack of execution is. And this is something I found just like from talking to dancers, talk to your team members, talk to your co's. What do they feel like is the root cause of them like not really feeling it when it comes to bringing it on stage or in a practice? Because sometimes, and obviously I'm sure leadership will get a lot more into this, but main point here is like sometimes it's something that's like outside of just, oh, I don't know the choreo, or I don't know the formation, something like that, or I haven't practiced it enough. So really getting to that root cause, and you can see the impact that it has on execution. Another kind of aspect of that is overall team mentality and how that reflects in energy. So how people feel about dancing the piece can really showcase on stage. It translates in a way on stage. So like, for example, we always aim to really dance like a family, like we're really enjoying ourselves out there on stage, because that's why we're here. We're here, for us at least, we've identified we're here to dance with each other. We're here to have fun performing this piece. And so for us, then the best comments that we get are when judges and audience members are like, that energy that you have, that the team captures and brings on stage, really translated. So that kind of overall team mentality and kind of what is driving people and driving the team as a whole can also really showcase on stage. And of course, that gets more into leadership as well, but it definitely has an impact on the level of execution and energy in a lot of ways. And then we can talk a little bit about like difficult choreo and formations. So like one thing for us, or that I like to keep in mind when the team is struggling with different more difficult choreography and formations, like large movements, something like that, is just keeping feasibility in mind. That's kind of how we approached it. So obviously you want to like push your dancers and push yourselves to a high level, but also at a certain point, like Bhavik mentioned earlier, like sometimes you have to prioritize certain things, and sometimes that means what's it called? Kind of reworking and reprioritizing the segment that you have. And then Neil, if you can add anything on that. Oh, I think you're muted.
I think, sorry, from an endurance standpoint, it's really important to get your team to do things when you're tired. And Monica kind of talked about this before, but you can do things in a line over and over, and you can ask your team to do like 8 beats over and over till they get it right. But to me, that stuff doesn't translate at all if you're not doing it when you're tired and you're not able to implement it in a full run through. So, there's different things you can get your team to do to get them tired. For our team, we would do full song double touches, and then we would go straight to that song, or we would do the same song like 4 or 5 times in a row as like one song or a full run through. And just like if you're tired, you're not going to be able to do your facials, you're not going to be able to do your heads, you're not going to be able to hit your arms hard, you're not going to hit your points. So endurance is honestly like one of the biggest things when it comes to good execution at all levels.
The last thing that I wanted to add on with that was, so I think endurance is something that every team like struggles with at some point. So what we would do is like if you play basketball, you kind of know what suicides are. So it's kind of like Raas suicides. So you start with one song, you go to 1 and then 2, and you start from the beginning, 1, 2, 3, and you work all the way up to the entire routine. And like trust me, like it's so bad, but if you're gonna ask me what is the best way of building stamina, that's for sure the best way. And it sucks, but it is what it is, because the only way you can perfect execution is by executing properly, or getting close to perfect execution is executing properly when you are exhausted. That's pretty much the only way. Otherwise, you're going to be building muscle memory for something that's not even going to look what clean looks like, right? And I think that's pretty much it that we had for what we were going to discuss on our presentation. I think now we're going to leave it open for questions.
Yeah, so the first question from the Slido is, How do you eliminate the common misunderstanding that comes up when captains are trying to execute something and judges interpret it differently?
That's a little hard. I mean, if you give specifics, it's easier to answer. But like, I still think that execution is strictly like subjective. So like, you did it or you didn't do it. So if it's like, I think something where like the overlap becomes like, oh, we were meant to do that, is like your forms. And so like, if you're not hitting your forms, from what we interpret is you're not hitting your forms, and that's exactly what your form was. I guess like, I'm not gonna say you should change your forms because I didn't see it, but if it does look a little blended like on stage, then I guess that's a little bit harder for us to interpret what the form is supposed to look like, and in that case, did those dancers hit that specific form? So I mean, there's not really a good answer to that. I mean, I'm not gonna say, oh yeah, like stand your ground, tell the judges are wrong. And I'm also not gonna say that a judge is always right. You know, there's times where judges are wrong too. But I think like when you get a critique, I think to understand where they're coming from, and if you truly feel like, okay, like that wasn't the case, let's stick with it and see what another judge says. And like then at that point, if more judges are saying the same thing, then yeah, it might be something you might have to change when it comes to judging. But if you're content with how it looks on your performance, that's a whole other thing. You should keep it. You should. I truly believe that you should stick with what you think is right.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Just a quick add-on there. I think sometimes like it's also very important. Obviously, like put out what you love on stage, but also take into account kind of the readability or what people are seeing when they watch it. So it can be a really, really great idea, but if it's not, say like the formations aren't hitting that cleanly, or so you have like a theme, like a big moment, and that's not being executed as well, then you either would likely want to go back and clean that, run that again, really get like sharpen, make it sharper. Or, and this goes into more like choreography things, maybe it's like taking another look at how you can create something from a baseline that then leads to or lends itself to better execution. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's like weighing these different comments and perspectives, weighing your own vision, and putting out something that you love.
Okay, another person asked, would you sometimes recommend having easier choreo to maintain execution rather than having more complex things?
Personally, I would. I think it's great to have like a blend throughout your dance, but you know, with easier choreo, if you're able to execute it at a higher or like elite level, then that's just going to make that choreo itself look better. You know, you can have great choreo, but if your team can't do it, then it kind of makes the choreo useless, and you're not going to get that full effect of the choreo anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's also like one is like, what do you value when you're putting on stage, and also feasibility when it comes to like, you know, your team best, you know, your dancers the best, what can be feasibly executed. I think one thing is also to not look at it as like necessarily easier choreo, and we talked about this in the choreo panel, so you can go back and look at the recording slides, whatever. But like, you want to look, I mean, musicality, obviously one thing, but also think about it as like readability as well. So it's not just like, is it easier for you to execute, but is it easier for people to see that you're executing it? Like, does it read as something that is executed well, if that makes sense, when people are watching from the audience perspective. So it's not always just like, is the dancer able to do it easily?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say one thing. So I agree with everything that everyone's saying. Like, I really think it is very team dependent. So I'm just going to use a personal thing real quick. So for us, when we were dancing, like our boys unit was just like, we were not it, you know, we were not usually the wave. So when it came around to boys solo, like the goal was to just have it so that we kind of looked like blendable and we didn't like screw anything up majorly. And you can still have good execution of other things. Like usually the boys solo is where we would integrate our prop, and that would try and be like the focus of the boys solo. And then the dancing, obviously you want it to be good, but like it's about knowing what your team's strengths and weaknesses are. So I think like going easier choreo versus not, like you should be able to blend it all, but make sure you tie it into your team pretty well.
Gotcha. Okay. Another person asked, how long do you spend teaching choreo versus cleaning choreo versus putting in full energy at practice?
When I was captain, we would always teach the choreo to the point where people were doing it, whether it was sloppy or not. But so like that part would be pretty quick, except for like a few people. And like if someone's like really not getting it, I would continue and just meet up with that person afterwards so that we can get the choreo down later, because you shouldn't wait for one person for the entire team, you know. But that's my opinion. So we would teach it pretty quickly, and then when it came to like cleaning it up, that's where most of our time would go. So you would then clean up, break down every single thing into like a 4 count or whatever segment makes sense for like the choreo, and do a lot of drills of that until people started getting it down. And what we would do was have each other watch one another and give critiques. So that way, even when you're just sitting there watching somebody, you're still understanding, oh, like this person is doing this wrong. Am I also doing that? You know? And then the other way around also. So that's what we would do. I would spend more time on cleaning than actually teaching, because you can also teach outside. But I mean, of course, like that you, for the most part, you'll have only a few people who have difficulty picking up choreo. But yeah, I would spend more time on cleaning the choreo itself than teaching the choreo. That's my opinion.
I also think that you don't want to like keep those two things separate. I think when you're teaching, the most like critical time for execution is when you're teaching, because that's when people form their habits, and that's when people learn the moves, and that's when the most confusion can be caused.
Quick note just on like when do you add full energy? I would say, like, again, going back to that practice like you perform, even when you're drilling, really show and like exemplify how like people should be putting as much energy as they can, even into an 8 count segment. So that again, when you're teaching, when you're initially drilling it, that they're forming the right habits and right muscle memory. So then when they actually do it in the piece, even when they're tired, they still have that baseline to go back to.
Oh, to add on, since you mentioned energy, I thought of it. So with choreo, when you're teaching it, yeah, definitely teach your head choreo with it. But when it comes to like executing your head choreo all out, definitely have your team start as soon as possible with that. And the reason why I say that is because like once you start doing your head choreo like full out, like you kind of get disoriented whenever you're doing your travels. And so like if you already like get muscle memory down on how to like do your arms, your feet, and everything else perfectly, and now you're gonna add on your head choreo, it may be a lot more difficult. They'll start losing that cleanliness they had in other places to fix this like execution emphasis, right? So the earlier you start with like executing your head choreo full out, I think it would be better for teaching wise at least.
Okay, so the last question we have is, how do you help your dancers / team understand how to execute the choreo / the routine?
Personally, I think in everyone's dances, there's elements that you can look at from other teams. You know, if you're trying to get your team to understand like head choreo, then obviously you can like teach your team to look at DSD. I think like finding other team strengths can help your team see how, you know, those things are supposed to be done. I think dancers and everyone are very visual. They're watching you, they're watching people around the circuit. So, you know, you can tell them how things can be done all day. But I feel like if they can't see those things, then they're not going to fully understand it.
Yeah, I think also like watching other teams, identifying their strengths definitely, and also exemplifying it yourself, or like another like leader, someone like an upperclassman experienced dancer on the team to really exemplify what your choreography specifically, how you want that executed, because again, that's like your vision, what you want it to look like. So if you're able to show like, these are like the powerful heads that we want here, or this is like the maybe like the tension in the arms that we want for this part when you're extending. If you can show that, and again, like show that you are doing it as well, like that definitely trickles down. and people will just have a much better understanding of what specifically they should be aiming for and thinking of.
Yeah. And I know this is like a very cliche thing, but the short answer is really just like, is a lot of reps. Like it's like so many reps. Like there's really no other way to like get good execution other than like going insane with the amount of reps you do. And another thing I would just like recommend, I don't know if I'm sure a lot of teams do this, but like when you take on your new dancers, you have like a specific dancing style for your team. So if you can have some kind of boot camp to kind of like orient them, like what we do is we just have them, we reteach the tryout piece, but like properly. Like obviously, if you know how to do heads and stuff when you show up for the tryout, that's great. But most people obviously don't. So you teach them that, and that way it becomes easier and more of like a smooth transition. So
Yeah, for me, yeah, showing videos of teams, and also I think showing videos of particular dancers is helpful. You know, like kind of motivating someone like, oh, like this is what near perfect is. This is what you need to strive for. But what I always told my team whenever I did tell them that is, you need to add your own little flair to it. Like I don't want you to be that dancer. I want you to be you, but you need to like be what's it called, close to that dancer in your own way. So whenever, because I'm a bit on the older side, I would always show UMBC because that's like my favorite team, one of my favorite teams. And then I would particularly show them Barag dancing. And like back then, Barag was just like probably the best executing person in my opinion. Nowadays, I'd probably say if you're going to do that same thing, I would go with, yeah, definitely watch Neej. He pretty much checks off everything for that. But I think the first step is to kind of motivate someone, because if they don't have that mentality to want to do it, they're probably not going to do it anyways. Then you just got to keep drilling it on them. But if you develop that mentality first and then try to encourage them to do it, then they'll most definitely do it. So show videos and then definitely drill. If you're only doing a few runs a day or per practice, you're doing something wrong. You need to do a lot of runs.